10 o'clock, is it? Yes. Yeah. Morning, everybody. I get reminder, mobile phones to switch off, please. There are members of the press attending this meeting virtually. Can I please ask those attending virtually to switch off your microphone to avoid the meeting? Councillors, sure those attending virtually can hear the proceedings. Recording to capture the entire meeting, please ensure you project your voice and speak clearly. A formal meeting, don't refer to councillors by their first names, please. No fire alarm planned, therefore, upon hearing the fire alarm, please leave the building by your nearest fire exit. Assemble at the top of the car park. To the meeting, just point item 6. Councillor Prue Maskell is unable to join us today, and I believe it is her 30th wedding anniversary. Is that right, Councillor Prue?
I think that might be the case. I think it's a tremendous event and a thing of, stoicism.
It would be nice if this committee has sent her and her husband our very best wishes and congratulations. But as a result, because this was Councillor Maskell's motion that was deferred from full council, she's now asked that today that this be deferred now to the SNR meeting in June. Everybody. So if we move into the start of this,
yes, Joe, from Councillor Maskell.
Apologies. Yes, Councillor Beederman as well. Can we approve the minutes of the last meeting? Moved by Councillor Lever, Caroline Lever, seconded by John Petrinas. All those in favour of accepting those? Thank you. Item 3, there's no item to be brought forward. Items 4, declarations of interest. Sam, do you want to, sorry, Beth.
Yes.
Yes.
So, Chair, in relation to item 7,
Yeah.
all councillors except for councillors Ricky Knight and Caroline Lever have an other registered interest in this item, which is being disclosed for transparency purposes only, except for councillors Clayton, Peter Lever, Crabbe, Williams and Wilkinson, who have a direct interest in the item or will need to leave the room at the point of deliberations or and decision is made. Councillor Caroline Lever has a non-registered interest, which she's declaring for transparency reasons. And also in relation to item 8 on the agenda, councillors Peter Lever and Clayton have both declared other registered interest in item 8. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, that's redundant to purposes for this meeting, so there will have to be a new chair elected for the purposes of item 7 and 8. But that's something that's committed to decide. Any other declarations of interest? Should actually point out as well, there is an informal meeting after this. Ken has refused to give us sandwiches because we're going to be we have a meeting, actually IT training at 2 o'clock this afternoon, some of us, so it was anticipated this would be a shorter meeting today anyway. We'll discuss the agenda in the informal meeting. Item 5, to agree the agenda part A and B. There is no part B, so move on to part A. We've already said about item 6, so we'll go straight into item 7, transfer community assets and expressions of interest. And this is John Triggs who's going to talk us through this.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Members, you'll recall back in March, we brought a policy document to your committee for approval in terms of how expressions of interests from town and parish councils would be dealt with. Members approved that policy, and obviously since then the team have been working through the expressions of interest that have come forwards. We received 85 asset expression of interests from 17 town and parish councils. The report in front of you today brings an updated position in terms of those assets and recommendations around a phase 1 transfer, and also to confirm which assets obviously would then be considered in later phases. You'll see in your papers you have 3 appendices, Appendix A, B and C. Appendix A and B are exactly the same information, they're just sorted in different orders. Appendix A sets out the assets in category order, so you can see how assets have been determined. Appendix B then sorts those into the requests by town and parish order, so you can see what requests have come forward from each of the individual town and parish councils. And then Appendix C moves on to the initial phase 1 transfer of assets. You'll see in the papers we've applied something called a RAG rating. That acronym stands for red, amber and green. It's a bit like a traffic light system that just shows how we've categorised the different status for each asset. We use that here to separate out those assets that were straightforward as not being considered. That could be, for example, an asset that has revenue generating, such as a car park, which was approved as part of the policy but not for consideration. As you can see, we also had a couple more categories than just the normal red, amber and green, and we've used the system to sort into those that were, yes, priority assets that we should look to transfer in this initial phase 1. There were 13 of those. Yes, non-priority assets that we would look to transfer at a later stage, but after phase 1, as there was not so much urgency on those assets. 9 for further consideration and further work to look at those assets to determine if they fell into those initial categories. 2 that were out of scope, and 34 with recommendations for no. As I've alluded to, Appendix A and Appendix B are exactly the same information, and Appendix C sets out those on page 25. So in terms, members, of the process that we followed, following that policy approval in March, firstly, the assets were looked at in by category first. So we've looked at the categories, for example, allotments, car parks, community assets, etc., so that a consistent approach could be ascertained across those different types of assets coming forwards. As some, for example, car parks will be ruled out due to their revenue raising applications. As they raise income, then obviously we need to have a mind on the new unitary authority coming forwards in terms of that ongoing financial viability for the new council. The rationale behind that categorisation was to determine if a group of assets had a future risk of change, such as any pieces of land, that in future a unitary council might take a different approach, or even change its use and think about disposing of them. That's why we wanted to categorise them in this way. As you can see from the list in Appendix A, under land, there were a couple such as the BMX track in Ilfracombe, some sport and recreation areas in Rock Park, like the skate park and tennis courts, plus, of course, our remaining public conveniences that have not transferred out yet to town and parish councils following the initial transfers that have taken place over the last 2 to 3 years. The above were then categorised into yes priority, so that we concentrated on those potential at risk in the future assets to enable those to be transferred in that first phase, subject to your approval today. Where there are covenants or long-term leases in place for certain assets, the urgency of those goes away because there are already legal protections in place for those current treatments of assets. An example of that was raised last week was the Marine Car Park in Instow. That has car park and public conveniences under that asset. That car park's already in the control of the parish, and likewise the toilets on the same land. Therefore, in terms of that rationale behind asset transfers, there's no risk for the current NDC or future new unitary authority that the use of that asset can change. As, for example, the Instow car park, the planning conditions of the car park has perpetuity and planning in place for it to be held for that specific purpose. That's why the RAG status said no, there's no real risk at this stage. As members can appreciate, just the transfer of one asset can take a significant amount of time and staff resources within our property, legal, PMO function and finance teams, as we've already experienced with the transfer of public conveniences. Therefore, through this expression of interest process, we've had 40 in total that could be categorised potentially as yes to transfer, hence why we've now categorised them into a priority of 13 and non-priority list of 27. I was also asked recently, out of fairness, could a parish that should be entitled to maybe have one asset each to make it fair across the board? What I would say to members is the policy that S&R approved set out the parameters of how we should treat those assets, expressions of interest. What I've outlined today sets out the process we've undertaken to ensure those assets that might be a future risk of change, depending on how the future plays out with unitary status, needed to be prioritised first. The resources needed to transfer the initial 13 in that category is significant. We can't underestimate the task lightly in advance of all the work we have to do with LGR approaching. And we cannot transfer them all in one go. And that prioritisation needs to be considered by members with wider projects and pieces of work that you want us to consider as well. So yes, we could have taken a different approach and said we take one from each area. However, that would have resulted in a totally different outcome, with a lot more of non-priority assets coming forwards to be brought into phase one, and some of the priority assets set out in the paper would be dealt with later. So therefore, depending on the resources and timeline, that could have resulted in a totally different position and not be transferred before the authority starts, the new authority starts. So members, it's therefore recommended that you consider the expressions of interest in front of you today and set out in appendices A and B. And if you are content with the proposed treatment as set out, the members look to approve the priority phase one transfers as set out in appendix C. If members want to deal with other assets that are in appendices A and B to come forwards for consideration as part of appendix C, what I would recommend is that you deal with those in appendix C separately today. And if there were other assets you want to be brought forward as part of today's consideration, then we have a separate working group and bring those forwards for consideration at a future S&R meeting outside of the ones shown in appendix C today. Obviously, when we come on to the vote in dealing with appendix C, we will need to remove some members from the room due to their twin-hatted status with town and parish council considerations. And approval for appendix C will then be with the remaining members that would be in place. So, Chair, in your papers, you have recommendations 2.1 and 2.2 on page 11 that members note the work undertaken and the assessed status in place for each of the assets that have come forward from town and parish councils. And also you have recommendation 2.3 that members approve the priority phase one transfer of assets as set out in appendix C and authorise the head of place properties and regeneration to finalise heads of terms with the respective town and parish councils and implement the freehold transfer of the assets for phase one transfer. So, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions. Obviously, if members want to discuss individual assets, then we will need to consider then the approach in terms of moving out of the room.
Yeah. Thank you very much, John. I've got Councillor Petrinos and Councillor Crabb, Councillor David Knight.
2 points. First off, I'd like to understand better what these things on the spreadsheets mean. For example, further consideration is next to some asset. Does that mean they could become high priority to transfer? And secondly, there's the final column talking about risk. Well, risk is really just one side of a coin. It's also an opportunity. So you could say that in determining risk, this authority is taking the decision-making power away from the future unitary, whatever that may be, to capitalise on that assets in a way that they think purpose, that and think most appropriate at the time. And my second point, though, is that we communicated to every single parish and said, let us know what assets you would like transferred. And we've ended up with a list of 13, of which 5 are toilets that already knew were going to be transferred anyway. So that only leaves 8. 7 of those 8 are Rock Park. So there's only 1 that isn't either Rock Park or a toilet, which makes me think that we've artificially raised the expectations of every town and parish in the district when the resources simply weren't available to be able to deliver what was implied in the communication. Is that correct?
Before you come back to that, I understand your point, Councillor Petrinos, but my understanding is that at least the first stage, so it's not appendix C and then nothing else. It's just a matter of what can be done in time frame.
So we'll actually bring me on to a point I've got to mention, which is when could we expect, in terms of time, the non-priority assets to be brought online?
So I can come back on the last point. Obviously, yeah, there's 13 in the initial tranche, phase one, 27 that were yes, but just not as that priority. Okay, so out of the 85 assets, what we are saying is there are 40 there in that initial consideration that were obviously considered as yes, but obviously resources transfer 40 assets, and that's for members to consider as part of this exercise alongside today and future meetings where we consider assets, how quickly you would like those assets to be considered for transfer. If you want the council's priorities to be transferring assets, then that would take away significant resources from being able to do other pieces of work, such as working towards LGR and delivering along other priorities that the council may have as well. So there needs to be a balance struck between that. In terms of the toilet assets, yes, on the initial tranche, there are the remaining toilets that towns and parishes hadn't engaged with us about as part of the initial process. So when we went out a couple of years ago to consider transferring to towns and parishes, some came forwards and were keen to take those assets on in the early stages. Some have been transferred, some are currently in the process of being transferred, such as those to Ilfracombe. We've already transferred to Braunton and 1 or 2 in Ilfracombe already. The remaining ones are those where towns and parishes didn't engage with us at first stage, but they have as part of this process, as part of looking at it, as part of the wider asset transfers. So that's why they're on the list now, because we do consider we want to get those remaining toilets over the line to follow that pattern of those that have been considered. The transfer of assets for those that are further consideration, when looked into, there's assets in there where we need to understand the extent of that request a bit further. So some of the information that came back from the towns and parishes wasn't explicit enough. There also may be other considerations beneath that where there might be other partnerships in place, such as we have with other stakeholders, such as North Devon Homes. So some of those assets needed further consideration before we brought them back with a clear classification. But the ones that are under further consideration, quite rightly, as you say, Councillor Petrinos, could move then into a yes priority or a yes non-priority categorisation. But we need to do a piece of further work on those and have those wider conversations with stakeholders. The other point was around risk management. Yes, quite rightly, as you point out, we've tried to assess these, say, well, okay, which of those potentially could take a different direction in the future if it goes to a new unitary authority. That's not to say that they would take that decision, but we've tried to consider those along the lines of, well, okay, could there be a change in the future, and is it worth now those being looked at as part of that priority phasing? Quite rightly, the new unitary authority may take a different view on that and may not change the context of how they're treated in the future, but we have to try and just assess those that potentially could be at risk. Within those that are in Rock Park, obviously there were 1 or 2 assets that we had in that category, and then there are some that weren't potentially at risk, but as dealing with a number of assets within close proximity to each other, it was felt right that those assets within the Rock Park area were dealt with as one cohort of assets, rather than just doing them in piecemeal if we're just looking at Rock Park as a totality.
But they're not at risk. But they're not at risk, yeah.
They're not at risk. There was one that was at risk, which I think was the skate park, I think, or BMX track, skate park, I think it was. And therefore, the wider assets within Rock Park that sit alongside that, from a placemaking perspective, it feels right to look at those assets together rather than looking at them in isolation. Otherwise, we may be looking at them as part of a yes non-priority in a few months' time. And therefore, if we're dealing with the town council and dealing with assets that are joined to each other, it makes sense to actually look at those together.
So, yeah, and the other point was about raising the expectation of parishes. When, as you've just explained, what we've actually got on here is toilets, one in Rock Park and Luxton. So just 2 non-toilet assets.
Yeah, we've got 40 in total that have come forward with yes. Some are in this priority phasing. As the leaders pointed out, this is about starting that process. This isn't about saying, well, these ones will definitely and these ones definitely won't. We've drawn a line through those where we feel definitely would not be for consideration. But out of the 85 that have come forward, 40 of them at least are in that initial yes stage. There may be others that are under further consideration that might grow that number. So in terms of raising expectations, we were very clear when we went out to members that there was no guarantee of any assets being transferred, depending on what came forwards. So we've invited those expressions of interest, we've considered them, and actually, out of 85 assets, to say actually we're quite happy to look at transferring almost 50% of those. 40 is a considerable number of assets to transfer over. We're going to do those in initial phase 1 of doing the first 13, and then look the resources required to look at the consideration of the third 27 as part of that next phase 2.
Before I bring in other councillors, I think Ken wants to just say a few things.
Yeah, just a couple of points on the those that have been raised. Just on that last point about raising expectations, if I recollect correctly, when members decided to go out to parishes with this offer, there was a realization that we could be raising expectations of parishes, and that's why we have tried to temper that. There was also, if I recall, a realization that we wouldn't have the resources, or we probably wouldn't have the resources to be able to satisfy all of the requests that were likely to come forward at that time, and that was made clear to parish councils at the start of the process. In relation to the resources, as John has said, we have to balance the resources that we have, because we have got a massive task ahead of us with LGR. As part of the informal session later, I want to go through what some of those resource requirements might look like, because it is becoming a bit clearer now. I would suggest that you treat this as the leader has said, as the start of the process. We don't need to provide a timeline for the other assets, because we don't know what that timeline is yet. It's really difficult, because we need to see what resources are going to be sucked into the LGR process, and we also need to look at the other priorities that members have set officers as part of the corporate plan, and whether we need to review that in order to free up those resources. In relation to risk, this is a bit of a hypothetical exercise. I don't want anybody to go away thinking that there are plans being drawn up by this big bad unitary authority that's coming in to close assets. What we have done as officers is try to hypothetically think about what types of assets that new unitary authority may feel are appropriate to pass over to parish and town councils, and effectively preempt that process. So we're not saying that there are plans to close a whole load of assets. Nothing like that is being discussed across Devon. There aren't those sort of Devonian plans being drawn up at all. This is just our attempt to think about, well, okay, well, how do we prioritise these 85 requests in a way that doesn't bog down the council in dealing with 85 property transactions over the next couple of years. And one of the things that we looked at was, as I said, just thinking about what type of assets that new authority might be happy to pass over. This isn't the be all and end all, because even if assets don't transfer before vesting day, I am absolutely sure that the new unitary authority will be open to conversation with the parish and town councils in exactly the same way that we are now. And it can be part of an ongoing process with that new authority. But please bear in mind, members, that I know there might be some disappointment around the table that the list at the moment only runs to 13, and it comprises the assets that we've talked about. But we do have a huge issue in front of us with LGR, and a huge resource issue that we need to address. And I can't repeat enough, and I said it at the start of the process, if we have officers bogged down on 85 property transactions, then we're not going to get done what we need to get done.
This, of course, is all presupposing that the Labour government manages to pull itself out of a mess and nothing gets delayed at a national level. As far as LGR is concerned.
That's the political side, Chair. As officer, I'm looking at the process that can go through, the programme that we have to go through, and it is going to be extremely challenging.
Yeah. That's a plan.
Couple of very quick points. I want to very briefly talk about asset A7759. So if Simon jumps in and steps a bit. It's called BMX track, but it's never seen a BMX bike. I think it's a skate park. I was going to say that the town council and your Ilfracombe Regeneration Board, which you proudly are part of, have aspirations to expand that into a BMX pump track and a rough mugger area. So can I just make members aware that if that is transferred, it would be lovely if it was a bit bigger. Bear that in mind. However, I've also been asked to read something out by someone from Croyd, which is, whilst I appreciate, this is Councillor Maskell, sorry. Whilst I appreciate car parks are not being considered as transferable assets because of the financial implications to the council, I do think that in the case of Croyd Village Car Park, the parish have a valid case. The land for the car park was given to the parish by Mrs. Killard Levy for the benefit of the community. The car park was always free, and I believe that when it was transferred to the North Devon Council, it was supposed to remain a free car park. That being said, times change and it would be very difficult to operate and maintain for free in this day and age. However, the fact remains that this land was given to our community. For whatever reasons, it was transferred to NDC, whereas it should have remained as a community asset. And I am concerned that if it becomes an asset of the new unitary authority, it will become further removed from the community. The parish council pays for security to patrol the car park at night in the summer months because of antisocial behaviour and overnight camping. I'll cut some of that out. In summary, the parish council owns the access road, the land surrounding the car park, including the play park and skate park, access through the car park, and the village hall. If they were to regain ownership of the car park and take over the toilets, it would bring that whole centre of the village back into control of the community. There we are. I have placed Councillor Maskell's thoughts firmly on the record.
Oh, Councillor Maskell,
It is.
somebody's contacted Councillor.
No, that is from Councillor Maskell.
John, do you want to come back on that?
I mean, obviously, the policy that members approved touched on not looking at those ones that are revenue generating car parks. Obviously, there's a whole number of assets that the council owns that obviously have been transferred to the council in 74 when the council was formed. So there'll be lots of examples similar to that. We have to consider those current positions of those assets. Obviously, it is a revenue generating asset that contributes to the council's revenue budget. We have to consider that moving forward with the new unitary authority as well. So policy members are approved, obviously agreed with that, and we've treated the treatment of that asset in line with that. We can't deviate from that. There is obviously a conversation moving forward if Croyd want to come to the council and put a proposal in terms of wanting to buy that car park. That's a separate consideration in terms of financial viability and whether that would be the right thing to do moving forwards. But in terms of gifting an asset away that generates revenue to this authority and obviously the new authority, that wouldn't be something that we would be up for consideration at this stage.
Councillor David Knight.
Yeah, I think I'd just like to start with something positive and actually thank the officers collating all this information, getting it into the agenda today, because actually I can see that the conversations now are, there's a huge amount of officer time and staff resources that have already been put into this, and obviously to move this forward, again, there's an enormous amount of work to run alongside LGR. But my kind of question is, there's obviously clearly, I was not wanting to touch on individual assets today, and there's clearly going to be questions and discussion. You did mention a working group, and actually how we kind of manage these things and move that forward, because obviously if there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, there's going to be members who may want to join a working group and actually ask specific questions, and obviously not bogging this meeting down today with individual things, and just how that working group would progress our position, because it's clear that it's a very difficult balance between officer time and the LGR situation, which is an enormous thing. So yeah, how will we progress the working group?
I mean, we've suggested a working group if members are concerned that the Appendix C doesn't contain assets that they would like to transfer. What we're saying is approve Appendix C, let's crack on with that. And then if there are other issues, let's have a discussion about those. And we're suggesting that that takes place through the working group. Beyond that, we don't have a plan as to who sits on that working group, how often it meets, etc. What I'd like to ensure is that it doesn't become an all-encompassing piece of work that drags a whole load of resource into it. I can't keep repeating that, no. But if there are concerns about assets that members have that they think should be on that list and aren't, then let's have a discussion at the working group. Let's not delay approving these Appendix C items. Let's crack on with them first.
So we need a 2.4 then, don't we? A 2.4 recommendation.
We don't need a recommendation, Chair. What we're saying is if we crack on with if we approve Appendix C, if there are then subsequently concerns being raised by parishes or by members that a particular asset hasn't been included on it, then it's not the end of the process. What we can do is we can set up a working group and we can have that discussion at the working group to see how we can bring those forward in the resources that using the resources that we have available. So we don't necessarily have to set it up now. It can be set up at any time. And can deal with any concerns that are raised.
I just think it would be an idea to actually have something set up in case we do need it, because otherwise we'll have to wait for another SNR meeting to constitute the working group.
I don't think we need to formally constitute it. If members wish to do that, then that's fine. We don't need to formally constitute it as a working group.
Yes, Chair. Obviously, those if Appendix C is approved, then those 13 would obviously start the process of agreeing heads of terms and the conveyancing process. We obviously would then be looking at the next 27 in terms of okay, what resources are needed, and what's the potential timeline to be looking at that next tranche. Those conversations need to take place through those internal meetings with yourselves as SNR members around the priority resources that are needed. We've touched on before about if there's more resources needed, some of the costs of this or the cost of transferring assets will be borne by the towns and parish councils themselves. So there may be a need to outsource elements of the asset transfer process that may require external legal resource. Possibly in that case, we would obviously outsource and recharge that cost to towns and parishes. We need to understand what resource requirement that we need for the first 13, then looking at the next 27, and that will then draft out a timeline in terms of when they would be potentially then considered. That's probably the time then when you may need a conversation about would a working group or a discussion about the timeline of those asset transfers then be the right time.
Councillor Powers and then Councillor Ricky Knight. I didn't see him.
Ages ago.
I didn't see him.
Ages ago.
I didn't
You
see him.
said my name.
Yeah, we did.
You did actually say.
Yeah,
my name.
We've got Councillor Caroline Lever first, and then
Thank you.
Councillor Malcolm.
Thank you. So I'd like to echo the thanks that have been expressed for the work that's gone into this already by officers, and I don't think that any of us in this room underestimate how much work this is and how challenging this is. But I suppose my starting point on this is, why are we even looking at this in the first place? And it goes back to the uncertainty for our communities in North Devon about what the future holds. And there's an awful lot which is not in the control of any of us here in North Devon. We do not know what model of local government reorganisation we're going to have. We could potentially end up with a giant single Devon unitary where there could well be that the power base is absolutely not in the north. And although there's a lot of discussion about neighbourhood governance and so on and so forth, we don't yet know what that really looks like. So I think for me, what this is about, it's a really clear demonstration that communities in North Devon actually care about assets within their communities, and they're going to the subject of risk or opportunity, that there is a lack of trust that perhaps the voice of communities in North Devon are going to be heard clearly enough and strongly enough by whatever unitary we have imposed upon us to make sure that the assets that communities really value remain within the control of local people. So I think, I've forgotten which one of you it was that talked about, making decisions ahead of the unitary and taking control of things out of the unitary hands. That's exactly the point. We absolutely are here about trying to protect what's important to our local communities here in North Devon. None of us have asked for local government reorganisation. None of us will have any impact on the decisions that are made at government level as to what we end up with. So as I just reiterate, this is about us trying to make sure that we are able to protect for the longer term assets which our communities in North Devon really, really value. So that's the starting point. So then I get on to process, and as mentioned by Councillor Knight, David Knight, I really appreciate the amount of work that's gone into this. I have to say the table, when you print it out, it's almost illegible. It's so tiny, it's impossible to read. It has been quite hard. I was on a ferry yesterday coming back from France. I spent my ferry journey reading through this and enlarged and moving from left to right and up and down. It was not the easiest of documents to negotiate, let's put it like that. And I think that there are some layout things that perhaps we might want to talk about, but I'm not going to get bogged down in that. But I ended up with a whole bunch of different, oh, my screen's gone, a whole bunch of different questions, and a lot of it is really about process. So there are a number of these individuals, and I won't mention any of the individuals, but there's a kind of, what was the process behind the decision for that particular rank rating for an individual item? There isn't anywhere in the report that really explains that. In terms of some of the questions I've got, you've already answered, John, about the yes but non-priority. What then is the process? An additional question, I suppose, is about timescale. I think one of the really big questions, and I think parishes need to know this when they're asking this, is actually about their bearing the cost of this, which, you know, has been really clear since from the outset. Actually, what kind of cost are we looking at? Because there may be some smaller parishes that think, actually, we've put in whatever asset. Maybe this cost is the balance of that against the potential benefit or the potential risk or opportunity. Maybe that balance with that additional information changes, and maybe some come out or whatever. So that information would be useful. I think what's also really clear is that so it's what's the process of rag rating. Councillor Petrinos has already raised the question that perhaps we come at it from a different perspective, but I think we could probably all agree it's not really clear what the process was for identifying risk, because I think, or opportunity, and we may see things differently. But as long as the process is clear, then it makes it easier for us and indeed the public to understand how that rating has been achieved. There are some in here that I would say they are definitely at risk, which have got are not identified as being so. It may just be a different sort of view for the starting point or whatever, but the process being clear would be really helpful for all of us. And I think the other thing that I go to is that there are certainly some town councils, I know Barnstable and Ilfracombe, for example, have put quite a lot of thought into the submission that they made to the district council in terms of thinking of a submission of a number of different assets that together work as a whole. Now, we don't have that kind of information within this report, and each of the individual items looks like they've been assessed on a one-by-one basis rather than as a whole. So we as councillors, we're not in a position to be able to understand that broader case that has been made by those town councils. It may be that other towns and parishes have done that as well, but we simply don't know. Simply don't know. So I think, you know, I've been thinking long and hard about, you know, how do we deal with this? I do think that we need to get on with those small number identified in Appendix C. Let me just try and whiz down to find Appendix C. Here we go. Yes, this small number. It does make sense for those ones in Rock Park, all of those various different blocks of land, to be treated as a whole. Presumably that will reduce costs in some way, but again, that needs quantifying. But I suppose my thought is that with those ones, for example, which are obviously the ones I know best because they're in my patch, that I don't know how transferring those, excuse me, how that fits into the overall submission that has been made by Barnstable Town Council. We don't know about costs, so I suppose it's the question about, is the first stage of taking forward those identified in Appendix C, is the first stage to go back to those parishes and town councils to say, what do you reckon? You know, is this possible for it to take forward just with this? So I suppose, I mean, I would like to propose that, subject to those questions being part of that process, I would like to propose that, yes, we go ahead or we approve going ahead with those in Appendix C, subject to the views of the towns and parishes involved, but that we do have a working group. My personal view is that should the membership of that, it's not up to us to decide that at this point. But that it should be decided probably between the chief executive leader. I'd like to put my hand up as it's a newly elected lead member of local government reorganisation. That I'd quite like to be in the mix as well, and maybe other group leaders as well. But that's where I stand on all this. Thank you.
I'm confused because I thought we couldn't move into that resolution stage until the guys that have got an interest had to leave the room.
Well, I was going
And that's why I was going to actually move that we go to that stage, and that's why I gave in.
I'm safe.
I'm just thinking, we can't do it, can we?
So, yeah, it would certainly be best practice to keep the separated, because once something gets proposed and seconded, then we'll you're in the deliberation stage then aren't you? Yeah, that'd be this.
John?
Yeah, if I can come back, obviously before we get into the process, I'll come back on some of the points that were raised. Obviously, touching on process, the initial process was obviously looking at the expressions of interest that came forwards. Those expression of interest forms were sort of 2-3 pages from each of the town councils. We've asked all of them the same questions. That was around, why do you want the asset? Why do you feel it's best placed within the town and parish council? What's the community benefits? What's the opportunities that are there? Obviously, there's a lot of information in those forms. Some of them came back with 2 sides, some came back with 5 sides. Some did look at them with assets together as well, looking at them collectively. We obviously couldn't fit that all on the spreadsheet as well. She touched on the size of the spreadsheet already, and it's hard to get that down to a meaningful size to be able to present. But they were all considerations when assessed against the reg ratings and the statuses. And that's why we tried to differentiate them between those that were with the policy in mind against the policy, i.e. the revenue generating assets, etc. That's why they were classed as no's or out of scope immediately. The remaining ones then predominantly were, yes, they can be looked at as going forwards. So once we'd ruled out those that were definitely off the table, the remaining ones were then either into, yes, we can look at these now. Yes, these should come forwards as part of the phase 1 transfer, or these have some further considerations before they move into that yes category. So that's the process we took, taking into account the forms that came forwards. We could have put all those forms onto the appendix paper as well, but I'm sure you wouldn't have wanted to see 200 pages of expression of interest to read at the weekend as well. We tried to accumulate that into some form of summary, which is today. In terms of process following today, if members are mindful to agree Appendix C, that doesn't then finalise the process. There's then a conversation with towns and parishes around agreeing those heads of terms. Towns and parishes may, on the back of that, decide that they do not want to proceed with those transfers at this stage. They may take a different view. Now it's got to that point. They need to understand what implications that has. Part of the expression of interest questions were around, you will obviously need to bear the cost of these transfers. So how will you look to fund those in terms of your resources? And a lot of them said, well, we've got reserves to be able to pay for the cost of these transfers. And also, how would they maintain those assets moving forward? So part of that questioning and discussion was part of that expression of interest form that members approved back in March as part of the policy. So the next stage following today would be about then engaging with those towns and parishes around the next stage of process transfer. That will take a period of time. That will involve then understanding, well, okay, what resources are needed, what costs are involved. Towns and parishes right up to that point of transfer can then decide whether they still want assets transferred or not, or whether they want to step away from the process. So lots of opportunity for dialogue and engagement with those towns and parishes following the work that's been carried out today. And obviously we will bring updates back to members in terms of how that process is continuing on that journey. So the initial 13 that get approved will bring an update back to members to say how we're engaging with those towns and parishes, how those transfers are taking place, and also then the process as to how we're then starting the next phase of looking at the potential yeses that were in the next category as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Parson, more clear now.
Yeah, I was just going to say that whilst this list is important, and picking up what Councillor Leader said, I mean, people are concerned, very concerned. My communities are very, very concerned about what's going to happen. But besides this, I think we need to soon come up
with a report that shows that we've thought about the theatres, the leisure centre, the museum, and all those other strategic assets that, I do worry for Barnstable in terms of their precept, because looking at Appendix C, we're giving them stuff that's going to cost them money to look after and not huge revenue. And so, and I thought that was a concern that we were going to have, but we don't seem to have flagged that up in this process to any great degree. But anyway, that's an issue to the next person. I just think this makes complete sense. Agree those today. There's lots. I my own patch, I got some stuff that says yes, but not a priority. But there are debates around whether your graveyard is overflowing and you've got no room to bury people, whether that's a priority. It's quite a priority in my village, Anyway, but I don't want to get involved in that. So, I just think let's get on with this. Let's get a little group together that looks through the others so that we don't let the officer, shut the work away from the officers a bit. And I'm not thinking there'll be that many more, but there could be a number more that members would like to pursue, but we can't do it today. So I think the recommendations are very logical.
Councillor Ricky Knight, Councillor Wilkinson. Councillor
Yeah, my question was about cultural assets, so I take.
Okay, Councillor Wilkinson and Councillor Crabbe.
Yeah, well, sorry, very brief. Thank you, John. Obviously, my own parish has got 2 toilets, 2 WCs there that are priority for transfer. Would they be charged individually, or would it be you pay for the transfer of the 2? Would
obviously, in terms of if we're dealing with a town and parish and it's 2, obviously they're separate pieces of work because they're separate assets, separate freehold titles. So there are legal processes that have charges associated.
each one would have a charge?
Where there potentially is some efficiencies if you're dealing with 2 assets and they're being transferred, there probably will be some cost efficiency with the legal process. So it will be minimised as much as it can be, but there are specific.
I know that's one of the questions that will come back from a relatively small parish and population compared to obviously Barnstable town.
Yeah. I think if we were doing them separate and we were doing one asset now and one in 18 months' time, that would be more expensive than doing 2 assets in one go, because there will be some cost efficiencies through the legal process. So whoever's dealing with that, whether it's our own internal legal team or whether it's an external legal team, there will be some efficiencies of dealing with both assets, but there are some direct costs associated with individual freehold transfers that will be picked up by the point.
You could do 2 at once. Thank you.
Councillor Crabbe.
Very, very quickly, Chair, I hope. I'm just looking for some reassurance. The reports I've read, item C, happy with that, fully support it. Appendix A and B specifically says that pitch and putt course is a no. I'm just raising the issue. I just want some reassurance that if the BMX track was to get bigger, say to accommodate some more youth facilities, that wouldn't be an issue to this. When you get reports, you get paragraph 13 that you agreed 25 years ago and it trips you up. I'm just making sure that items A and B don't mess up the possibility of improving C. Does that make sense? And can somebody reassure me?
Yeah, and obviously we've assessed the individual assets as they are. Obviously things can change and evolve with situations move forward. So again, at the moment it's assessed as a no, obviously in terms of appendix A and appendix.
Don't want all of it, just a bit at the bottom.
And obviously if there's conversations then about changes in the future IEC and elements of piece of asset, that consideration and then conversation can still take place.
As long as it can, that's okay. You might be like an easy charge anyway. Go for it. Yeah. Of course.
Councillor Peter Lever.
I'm just going to say, it seems so we are moving towards deliberation stage of this debate, and I think it would be probably safest if those of us who are on parish and towns who are involved were to leave. And I'd like to propose Councillor Helen Walker to take the place of chair for this item and the.
If we get to that, I think Ken just wants to say something.
Yeah.
Before we leave, people that want to hear.
It was just because cultural assets have been raised a couple of times by Councillor Knight and Councillor Krantz. It's just to highlight a piece of work that is ongoing across Devon, where the Devon authorities have agreed to collectively appoint a consultant to come in and map all of the cultural assets across Devon, how they interplay with each other, what the landscape looks like as a totality, how the funding arrangements work, to gather a big picture, and then to look at, and then that information can be fed back to individual councils and to the LGR process to start thinking about how those cultural assets are protected and managed. And that the basis of that piece of work is about protecting those cultural assets and about understanding the importance of those cultural assets to the whole fabric of our communities. So it's a really positive piece of work that we are collectively doing together.
Councillor Caroline Lever, before we come to the pause.
Thank you. And I'm grateful to you for reminding us about that, because I think you've talked to us about this before. But for me, actually, the words that you've used there actually highlight why this whole discussion is so important. It's about protection. You know, and I go back to my previous comments about protecting what our communities hold dear, and how this is only coming about because of stuff which is being done to us rather than things that we have come up with. None of us, I think, that we've come up with local government reorganisation. It was being imposed, and we are having to react, and we can only do the best that we can do for our communities to protect what they hold dear, but within the law for all of that kind of stuff.
That piece of work is likely to report back in around August, I think, if I remember the timeline that we've specified. And so talking about, you know, the ongoing conversation about assets, it may then feed into that ongoing conversation that we have locally around those assets.
It's a quick one. I think Councillor Peter was about to propose a new chair, but I think the practice would be that would be done after you've left. So I don't think you can do.
Well, so what you're saying is
sole contribution to the meeting.
Yeah.
I go.
Someone else. Doesn't really matter. If it was 3-3, who did the casting votes? Who's, yeah.
That's going to chair now. It's next stage.
Yeah, if there's 6 of us here and it's 3-3. Who did the casting vote?
Casting vote.
So who's the chair?
Yeah. So are there nominations?
Yeah, well, it could be 2 nominations.
Yes.
It could be 3-3.
Well, I can chair the meeting in the meantime. So are there nominations for a chair?
Right,
I'd like to nominate Helen
I'll
Walker.
second Helen Walker because it's not worth it.
Are there any other nominations?
Would have been fun though.
There would have been.
There would have been. I nominate Malcolm.
All in favour of Councillor Walker being chair for this item?
You want me to move someone so I can see everybody?
No, that's fine.
I'll let you know.
Councillor Ricky, you might have to wave at me if I didn't see you.
That's okay. I
Yeah.
didn't even vote for you, so it's okay.
Okay, so we're moving on to Appendix C of item 7. Councillor Caroline Lever.
So, as I said at the wrong time of the meeting, forgive me for that. I'd like to propose, let me just come back on this computer because it's in the notes now, that the recommendation 2.3 that the members approve priority phase 1 transfer of assets as set out in Appendix C, that we approve that. I think I'm not quite sure about the wording of recommendations 2.1 and 2.2 because actually that's just to note the work. So Councillor Clayton suggested that we may want a 2.4, but that's maybe not what is suggested, but where I want to get to is to propose that we have a working group that is set up, that I would suggest that the detailed composition of that group is left to perhaps group leaders, chief executive, and as I say, I'm going to throw myself in there as in consultation perhaps with lead member for LGR. I don't know what that looks like in terms of a sensible proposal to change.
Obviously, you've got recommendations 2.1 to 2.3. So obviously they're here for your consideration. So obviously you can take them as read, unless members want to make any changes to that in relation to working group.
Well, I think what Councillor Lever is saying is the working group be set up to consider other requests on an ongoing basis.
I'm struggling to hear you, Ken, sorry.
That the working group be set up, to consider other requests on an ongoing basis. And that the working group be made up of, I think you said the leader, yourself, the other group leaders.
The detailed composition should be made up, should be agreed perhaps in consultation with Chief Executive, leader of the council, perhaps.
Okay.
It's not about that is the composition, but that the composition should be agreed or in consultation with.
Okay, so
Are you moving 2.1, 2.2 as well then?
Yes,
Yeah.
I am, but with the proviso that there is further discussion by the working group of those assets.
Sorry, are you changing the wording then of 2.1 and 2?
This is what I'm looking for guidance from officers. I think the wording.
If I read it right, you're taking 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3 as read, and you're adding a 2.4 that a working group be set up to consider other requests on an ongoing basis.
I can't hear what you're saying, John. You're going to have to speak louder.
Suggesting then there's a new 2.4 that a working group be set up to consider other requests on an ongoing basis. That composition to be agreed by the leader and the chief executive.
But to consider when we've had more information about the assets which are identified in Appendix A and Appendix B, where we would like to explore further as a working group. Because I think what's been really clear from the discussion is that we are being asked to make decisions and to agree what's in Appendix A and Appendix B and all of those reg ratings, but without the information behind it. So the point is that the working group is not just to look at additional things, but actually things that have come in already, which are in Appendix B and Appendix A and B.
So it's things that are already contained within Appendix A and Appendix B, because they're the expressions of interest that have come forwards. So what you're saying is that working group will consider those other items in Appendix A and Appendix B that haven't already been considered as part of Appendix C.
Yes. Thank you.
so we have a proposal. Do we have a seconder?
Second that.
Councillor David Knight. All those in favour? Right, so moving on to.
Because the next item. Yeah, some can't they? Of course, yeah, sorry, I'm going to. Oh, everybody but David and
Pete.
yeah.
Do we need to re-elect me as chair for this or?
Only if David and Peter, sorry, so Councillor Clayton and Councillor Peter Lever come back in again, because then if they want to talk at which they can do, they could talk at the start before the deliberation and vote, although they might feel that this is so non-contentious that they don't need to, but as soon as they come in, it reverts to them, and then you'd have to re-vote for a chair. So it depends whether they want to.
Me and Julie get very worried about that.
Yeah, especially with matching glasses.
We've been to Payman together.
Yeah, honestly, yeah.
Horror film. All we can afford, we can't afford these prescription things.
Yeah, so you'll have to put me back in.
See anything in the little, please. I don't know much. You want to like give some details on the screen?
That's all right, no, it's fine. It's fine. Richmond.
I'll go and check.
Back in or not? Or?
No, they're bad. They've got another item that they're not talking
The one
about.
at 6 at the Rock Park, yeah.
Yeah.
Can we just get on?
Yeah,
Well,
I suggest we carry on,
Yeah.
Councillor Walker.
So agenda item 8.
Got Mark.
Sorry, we were.
So can I pass over to Mark, please?
So this is a report to approve the release of section 106 funds for a project in Rock Park. You may be familiar with the existing path around Rock Park, around the perimeter. It's kind of a figure of 8 path. In places, it's a nice 2-meter wide tarmac path, but there's a section just over 300 meters long that's very narrow and not very sympathetic for people with mobility issues or push chairs, that sort of thing. So proposal is, or the recommendation is that committee allocates £66,350.46 to Barnstaple Town Council towards the cost of upgrading the section of footpath in Rock Park. The overall project cost is just over 70,000, but the town council is 79,000. The town council will bridge that gap. And then subject to recommendation 2.1, the Strategy and Resources Committee vary the capital programme by £66,350.46. The funds are released and the funds are subject to a funding agreement on such terms and conditions agreed by the senior solicitor and monitoring officer.
Lever. Thank you. Ward member for Rockland, time for whether section 106 money has come from. I can report to the committee that there's been quite a lot of work trying to find the best use for this money which is available. We don't often get this kind of sum in Newport because it's all built on anyway, most of it. So it's been a really interesting process, and Councillor York and I have spent quite a long time talking with residents, with officers, with town council and so on and so forth. And you'll see from the report that there has been a survey of users of Rock Park, and I am a user of Rock Park, so I probably ought to hold my hand up and say I'm a user of Rock Park. That it's really clear that that last bit of the footpath is very difficult for people who wheel for whatever reason, but actually just for able-bodied pedestrians, it's quite difficult because it's really narrow, really muddy. And I know from talking to quite a lot of particularly more elderly residents that actually they're really put off doing that figure of 8 because particularly in the winter, it's quite skiddy and quite uncomfortable. People don't feel safe walking on it. So I absolutely support this. A lot of work has gone into it. I'd be really grateful for the support of the committee, and I'd like to propose the recommendation that we let out at 2.1 and 2.2. Thank you. Councillor Ricky, did you want to say something?
Thank you, Ricky.
I did. Well, I didn't want, well, I'm going to really welcome this. I was on the trustee for many, many years. And I remember this was first proposed as something that was desperately needed, or at least a decade ago, if not longer. Well, I'm also a Rock Park user, to and from work for 30, 40 years. The thing is, it's really, really well used, that whole section. And it forces a lot of them, particularly by park school students, and it forces a lot of people onto the road, which is a very dangerous road at knock out a lot when the kids get kicked out, as it were. So if you like, long overdue, and I'm really, really pleased about this application. And it's been seconded, but I will. I can
unsecond it.
I'd be pleased to second it. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo the thoughts there, because I actually used to live in Newport. I use Rock Park daily. And again, fragmented pavement infrastructure across our area does preclude people from going out and using it in bad conditions. And we have actually made significant improvements in Tower View, and that has benefited the community hugely. The benefit is unseen because you don't really get a chance or an opportunity to talk to all those people. I do in Tower View, and they all say producing a route that people can walk round in winter time is just an invaluable use of funds, basically. Thank you.
Thank you. And having been one of the people who's got stuck on that bit of rock before. Okay, so can we move to the vote, please? All those in favour? If we'd like to get Clayton Lever back in. I'll have a further here.
Temperature.
There's a. It's that.
Doing some of his trousers. I don't know what he's doing with his trousers, but he's doing some of his trousers.
We're on home line now, Chair.
Right, thank you, and thank you, Chair. Was it you? So, thank you. So, item 9 is decisions taken by the executive.
Let a note, Chair, if there are any questions, I can answer them.
Anybody want to raise any questions? Yeah, thank you. Can we need to just note those?
Yeah.
Item 10, work programme. Basically, are there any adjustments? Anybody want to say anything? Councillor Caroline Lever?
It wasn't so much on adjustment, Chair, thank you for that. But looking at the June work programme, we've got the Preventing Homelessness Strategy approval for consultation. I just wanted to ask whether, wanted to suggest that it would be helpful to have those various different charities in and organisations in North Devon who are working with homeless people to kind of have to be consultees or to be involved in some way in producing the strategy. I mean, really clearly we have a regional leader in Encompass Southwest. There's Salvation Army who helps out in cold times and winter and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to make sure that our policy was something that they had been able to provide us with information that within that policy making.
Happy to take that on board. I'll speak to relevant officers later.
Thank you very much.
Any other points?
Well, just
Tonight.
something of point 3 for May.
Point.
Bruce motion.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, it's got to
Indeed.
Yeah. I mean, and it reminds everybody, this is the opportunity, as SNR, anything that you want to come to this meeting, this is the time to raise it with a view to Councillor Walker.
Yes, could we add the crematorium, please, to the July? The replacement of promoters to the July meeting, please.
Perhaps that.
Sorry, the potential replacement of the cremators to the July meeting.
Yes. Is that okay?
Yeah, I need to double check with the officers, Chair, but that may come forward as part of a capital bid, which would go into the quarter report. If not, it'll come in a separate report. So yeah, I'll check with the officers, but if not, they'll report it might come separate. Yeah, because it's asking for capital approval of funds, which will need to then go on to the July full council meeting as well.
Thank you. So Caroline Lever.
Yeah, thank you. I note that we've got a reserve date of 17th of August. We have already changed our holiday to make sure that our August is organised around strategy and resources. Not everybody may have done that. Don't know if with all the schedule has changed. And I'm just kind of looking at the things which are identified for the 17th of August. My guess is that they can't go into July because there isn't time for officers to prepare those reports after the quarter end, I'm guessing.
Yes.
So I suppose I just wanted to raise to remind us all that this is holiday season and we should perhaps be thinking to make sure that we are chorus at least at that meeting and not everyone's off enjoying themselves somewhere. We should be enjoying ourselves here at Strategy and Resources.
Chair, that's your quarter 1 performance report. Obviously, it's time to come to August, pending other business that you may consider in August. So if you choose not to have the August meeting, it will just go on to the September meeting. So the important thing is it gets approved by September, because it then goes into the capital programme that will come to full council in September. So it's subject to other items for consideration in August, and obviously your availability to have your August meeting.
Something that is better than coming here, talk strategy resources in the middle of holiday season. Would be my preferred activity.
So you can go with you.
Okay, any other points? Okay, no part B, so we'll conclude the meeting there. Thank you very much.